Hi yogis, thank you for joining me for another online yoga class. Today's class is designed for absolute beginners. So if you've never practiced yoga before, or maybe it's been a while since you've practiced yoga and you just want to get that basic understanding of the fundamental postures that we use in our yoga practice. So today we're going to be going over only 12 of the basic postures that we use in most yoga classes. So you'll find that these postures will help you gain the understanding that you need to evolve onto different postures. I do recommend here that if you have a block, that you bring that along, a yoga block. If you don't have a block, then you can use a book instead, that will work well. If you don't have that, then a cushion will work as well, fine. So as well, if you've got a strap, a yoga strap, that's going to be really useful here. If you don't have a strap, then you can use a belt or maybe the belt of a dressing gown or something like that to help you to reach the toes in some of the deeper stretch postures. So we're going to be going over the main postures to open up all the muscle groups and all the joint groups. If you are suffering from any injuries to any of your joints, especially focusing on shoulders, hips, knees, and if you've got any problems with the spine, make sure that you move really gently. I really hope you enjoy your practice with me this morning. Thank you so much for joining me. Namaste. Okay, so we're just going to start in a seated position, whatever that looks like for you. We're going to just take a moment to connect to the breathing. So if you're struggling here to sit down on the floor, then I recommend that you just sit up on a chair or on a cushion for a moment. Focus on elongating through the spine. So you want the crown of the head to be drawing away from the tailbone, nice and tall through the spine as the shoulders draw down and away from the ears. Okay, we're going to begin to connect to our breathing. So in yoga, we have a specific type of breath, which is sometimes called ocean breathing or sometimes called Darth Vader breathing. And that's because we're creating a small restriction to the back of the throat, as if you were fogging up a window. We breathe in and out through the nose in yoga wherever possible. So if you're working with congestion in the nose, then obviously you can breathe through the mouth. But if possible, breathing in and out through the nose. So just taking a moment, I recommend here if you feel balanced and stable that you begin to softly close your eyes. Take a deep breath in through the nose, feel it traveling, feel it lifting the chest, feel it expanding in the ribs and feel it expanding in the belly. And then as you exhale, create that restriction to the back of the throat, that sound, but out through the nose. And taking a few more deep breaths in and out. And keep being aware of your breathing. So if you feel the mind beginning to shift, notice if it's beginning to tell yourself stories, maybe you've got plans after yoga today, just softly bring it back to the breath. That's one of the many benefits of yoga, is that it helps to calm the mind, it helps to bring you into the moment and just focus on the here and the now, the breathing and the body. Taking a couple more inhales and exhales. And then bring the palms together at the heart center, softly blinking the eyes open. Namaste. So namaste means the divine light in you the divine light in me salutes the divine light in you, or hello and welcome. So we're going to try and continue to keep that yoga breathing, that ocean breathing throughout the entire practice today, especially in postures where you feel like you're struggling maybe with balance or it's really strength building. You're going to try and keep that yoga breath as your main focus. If you can't keep that breath, then make sure that you ease out of the posture to a point where you can maintain that breath pattern. Okay, so posture number 1, Sukhasana in Sanskrit, or easy pose in English. So it's called easy pose, it's not necessarily that easy, especially for people that do a lot of standing, walking, running. The legs can be quite tight. So traditionally, easy pose is a cross legs position. So make sure here that you can stay tall through the spine. So crossing at the shins, this may look more like this for you. If you have the couple of blocks here, then you can just place the blocks underneath the knees for support if this doesn't feel comfortable. Otherwise, you can sit up tall on the block to make sure that the spine stays straight and the pelvis stays balanced. Maybe you don't need the block at all and you can stay nice and tall through the spine, crossing at the shins. Okay, so we're going to take this pose, easy pose, and we're going to move it into a little bit of a warm-up, so taking a bit of movement through the spine. This may not feel like much for you, but it's important that we move the muscle groups a little bit before we take them into any deeper postures. So grounding down through the pelvis, again, tall through the spine, we're going to bring the hands to the outsides of the hips. So I recommend here, if you can't stay tall through the spine without the hands on the hips, hands on the floor, then you stay in this position, okay? So you want the spine to stay nice and tall. If you remove the hands and you feel like you're beginning to round through the lower back, then just keep nice and tall, pressing through either the fingertips or the palms of the hands, depending on how tall your arms are. And again, you can sit up on the block if that feels more accessible. If you can sit here nice and tall, then it might feel nice to bring the hands out in front. So lengthening the crown of the head away from the tailbone. Okay, we're not rounding, we're not bringing the chin towards the chest, we're not looking down. Instead, imagine that your chest is beginning to come through the tops of the shoulders, looking forward, and then slowly on the exhales, maybe we can begin to walk forward a little bit more. We're holding our postures for around 10 breaths each today. So with the breath, moving with intention. On the inhales, imagine that your spine is lengthening. So tall through the spine, shoulders away from the ears. And as you exhale, maybe we sink a little bit deeper into the fold. Maybe you're feeling a stretch in the outsides of the hips. Maybe you're feeling a stretch in the inner thighs. So we're at about halfway now. So on the inhale, we come back up, if you're folded forward, and we're just going to cross the legs in the other direction. So the other leg is in front, making sure we're nice and balanced through the hips. Okay, again, coming up down on the inhale, we lengthen, and as we exhale, we fold forward. Again, you can just stay here, lifting through the fingertips, lengthening through the spine. You want to be feeling a stretch in the hips and the inner thighs without feeling any strain along the spine. We tend to do enough rounding in everyday life, so especially if you do a lot of sitting or driving, you tend to naturally take on this kind of posture. So we don't really need to encourage that. Instead, encourage lengthening, shoulders back, tall through the spine as we fold forward. Keep your low belly drawn in to help protect your lower back. So breathing into the rib cage, nice deep expansive breath as the low belly draws towards the spine. And then as we inhale, walk the hands back up. And we're just going to take now a little bit of a twist just to make sure we've brought that movement into the spine. So we're going to start by bringing the right hand to the outside of the right hip, the left hand towards the right knee. On the inhale, the crown of the head draws away from the tailbone, so keeping the shoulders stacked over the hips. And as we exhale, we begin to twist, looking out maybe over the right shoulder. So here, you're not using your left hand to crank yourself round. Instead, you're using the muscles of the low belly to help you twist from the rib cage. So you want the chest to be leading the movement, maybe bringing the neck into it as long as there's not too much strain in the outside muscles of the neck. You want to be feeling a nice twist without bringing it into the hips. So you want your sit bones to be nice and grounded, either into the mat or to your block. On the inhale, we come through center. We bring the left hand to the outside of the left hip, the right hand towards the left knee. Exhale fully. Inhale, we lengthen. Exhale to twist. Looking out over the left shoulder. And again, you should be able to take this movement without the right hand being there. So you're not using the muscles of the arm to twist. Instead, you're using the muscles, the oblique muscles and the core muscles to help twist yourself a little bit deeper. And as we inhale, we come back to center. Okay, we're going to take our second posture now. low lunge position. So you may want your blocks ready for yourself here. We're going to come onto, to start with, just onto our hands and knees, just setting up our foundations here. And then what you're going to do is you're going to bring your right foot to the space between the hands. You can stay up on the fingertips here for a moment. Now, depending on the mobility on that back left thigh, this may feel like enough for you. Otherwise, so you can either have it so the knee is underneath the hip, okay, working with this, or you can begin to press that left knee back until you're feeling a stretch in the top of the left thigh. Okay, we're sinking low into the hips here. So for a couple of options, you can first take your blocks to the outside of the hips, work with this, lengthening, looking forward. I forgot to mention as well, but if you're feeling any pain in the left knee, you can always use a blanket underneath the left knee for support. Also, tucking the toes on the left foot will relieve a little bit of stress on the knee, but make sure that you modify it as needed. No pain in the knee. And again, you can stay here, or for an up-level option, adding in a little bit of balance, you can interlace the fingers, place them on top of the thigh. You want your right knee to stay stacked over the right ankle. So if you'll find you're here with the knee going past the ankle, just heel toe your foot a little bit wider so you've got that nice balanced position. And you want to draw the crown of the head away from the tailbone. So there's a tendency here, if you're quite flexible, to overarch in the lower back as if you're kind of sticking your butt out. Try to avoid this. Imagine that you're trying to draw your tailbone, which is your coccyx, just down towards the floor to help straighten out the lower back. So not rounding, but trying to straighten, flatten your lower back. And just look forward. So this is quite a balancing posture as well. You want to find one focus point that doesn't move, okay? So nice steady gaze, a nice steady breath. Shoulders are away from the ears and the chest is lifted. Take one more breath in. On your exhale, bring both hands down back to either side of the right foot. Step your right foot back to meet the left, coming into all fours again. And then we'll come into that on the other side. So bringing the left foot forward. It's quite common to feel different on different sides as well, so no judgment here if this side feels tighter or more flexible. So again, you can keep here with the hip over the knee. This can feel like enough of a stretch for you, or begin to draw that knee back until you're feeling a stretch in the hip flexors, which is the front of the right thigh. Okay, so you can work with this or place the blocks underneath your shoulders. Pressing into the hands, staying nice and stable, allowing the hips to sink low to deepen the stretch. And then the final option is to interlace the fingers, come to an upright spine and place them on top of the thighs. So again, you want your knee to be tracking over the ankle, adjust as needed. And you want your knee to be in line with the second and third toe. So you don't want it to be collapsing inwards or outwards, you want it to be facing straight ahead of you. Draw the shoulders away from the ears as we look forward. Visualize yourself flattening the lower back. You can have a blanket underneath the right knee or tuck the toes under. Keeping your ocean breathing, your yoga breath, in and out through the nose. Take one more deep breath in. And on the exhale, bring both hands down to either side of the left foot, stepping backwards, to your all fours position. Posture number 3. So we're going to be coming into a standing forward fold. So we're going to start in what we call mountain pose. This is really 2 postures in one. We're going to take mountain pose and then a standing forward fold. So for mountain pose, you want your feet to be either hips distance apart or your toes touching with a little bit of space between the heels, depending on what feels more grounding to you. You really want to be pressing through the big toe mound, the little toe mound, and the heel of the foot to find your foundations here. Nice and strong through the legs, equal standing in both legs. you want to try and activate the fronts of the legs. So imagine that you're trying to lift your kneecaps up. And again, we want to flatten the lower back like we did in the low lunge position, keeping the low belly drawn in to protect the lower back as well. You want your chest to be nice and lifted, shoulders away from the ears, and we look forward. Okay, so this is mountain pose. And from here, we're going to take it into a forward fold. So depending on the mobility in the backs of the legs, the hamstrings, this may look different for different people. We're just going to be working until we're feeling a stretch. So have a couple of blocks ready here in front of you. You're going to bring the hands to the waist, elbows back behind you. As you inhale, lengthen the crown of the head away from the tailbone. And as we exhale, we begin to hinge forward from the hips. So we're keeping the legs as straight as possible here to feel the stretch in the backs of the legs. So for some people, this may be the limit. That's fine. Work with until you're feeling the stretch in the lower legs, the backs of the legs, no strain in the lower back. Okay, maybe we can come forward a little bit more. And then come to a halfway position, if the mobility will let it, and bring your hands down towards the blocks. So I recommend that if you can't come to this position comfortably, you just work with staying in this position, opening up through the backs of the legs. If you're here quite comfortably and you think, hey, maybe I've got a little bit more space in the backs of my legs, then we're going to move it into an even more passive forward fold. So this is an inhale position, lengthen the crown of the head away. And then as we exhale, the crown of the head releases down towards the floor. The knees can be as bent as they need to be, whichever variation you're in. You don't want to be feeling like you're hyperextending in the backs of the legs. So maybe you can even adjust the blocks to a lower setting, or maybe you don't even need them at all. But what we don't want is to be rounding through the upper back like a cat, you know, as if your shoulder blades are lifting. We don't want this. We want to instead lengthen through the tailbone, chest is looking forward, lifting through the crown of the head. Okay, on the exhale, the crown of the head releases down. Inhale. Lengthen, look forward. Exhale. Crown of the head releases down. Inhale. Exhale. Taking a few more of these at your own pace. So if your legs are straight, you don't want your butt to be sticking out the back. There's a tendency to kind of stick your butt out the back if the legs are straight. So try to make sure that the hips stay stacked over the heels. Fronts of the legs try to remain active as if you're drawing the kneecaps up. Last round, inhaling, look forward. Exhale, crown of the head releases down. On the inhale, bend the knees, bring the hands to the waist, trying to come up with a straight spine all the way back up. And on the inhale, we release to our mountain pose. Posture number 4 is extended triangle position. So I recommend that you have a block here ready in your hand. We're going to bring our feet to about a leg's distance apart, so that's about 3 feet wide for me. It may be a little bit wider for yourself, maybe a bit narrower. You're going to bring your arms out. I'll just pop that down for a second. You're going to bring your arms out to shoulder height, and you want your heels to be roughly underneath your wrists. Palms face down for now. Shoulders draw away from the ears, and you want to be nice and strong through the legs. Again, quadriceps a little bit active here. You're going to turn your right toes to face the short edge of the mat, and you may feel it already here, the stretch in the inner thigh, maybe feeling it in the left hip. You want to draw your left hip back and in line with the right, okay? So there's a tendency to kind of draw that left hip forward, try to draw it back in line with the right, pressing through the outer edge of the back foot. The back foot can be big toe in about 10 degrees, so as opposed to the toes facing out, bring them in a tiny little bit. So arms out to shoulder height. On the inhale, lengthen the crown of the head away from the tailbone. As we exhale, reach forward as if you're trying to reach that side wall with your right fingertips. And from there, release your right hand down to your thigh or your shin, and you can begin to reach that left hand up towards the ceiling. So if you have a block, that's going to be a really useful tool here. Bring the block to the outside of the right foot and bringing the left hand up towards the ceiling. So if it's too much for that left arm to come up, you can always bring the left hand to the waist instead. You can look up if it feels nice on the neck, otherwise look straight in front of you or even look down towards the floor. Remembering this is a balancing posture, so staying strong through your foundations. You can have that front knee bent as much as you need to avoid hyperextending. So you don't want to be feeling any strain in the back of the right knee. If you need to have a soft bend, you can do that. As we inhale, we look down towards the right big toe, bend the knee as much as you need to come all the way back up to center and bring the right toes in. Exhale fully. And then we'll come into that on the other side. So inhale, the crown of the head draws away. Exhale, turn the left toes to face the short edge of the mat. Inhale to lengthen. As we exhale, reach forward with those left fingertips and then release the left hand to the thigh or the shin or the block. And bringing that right hand up towards the ceiling. So you can look down, you can look straight ahead, or if it feels good on the neck, you can look up towards that right thumb. You want that right hip to be drawing back and in line with the left. And you don't want to be collapsing through the upper back. So you don't want your right shoulder to be coming forward, looking forward. You really want to be opening up through the chest as if your chest was trying to reach up towards the ceiling. And ultimately you want your right shoulder to be stacked over your left shoulder. As we inhale, look down to the left big toe, bend the knee as much as you need to come all the way back up. And then as we exhale, step the feet back together, coming back into your mountain pose. Posture number 5 is Warrior 2. And we have so many warrior postures in yoga. They're a really fundamental part of it. They're really good for building strength in the legs and stability and grounding through our standing postures. So we're going to bring our feet again, quite wide. Bring the arms out to shoulder height. You're going to turn your right toes to face the short edge of the mat, just like we did setting up for triangle. Looking towards the right middle finger this time. We lengthen the crown of the head away from the tailbone. And as we exhale, we stack the right knee over the right ankle, pressing through the outer edge of the left foot. The left toes are in slightly. So if you're here and you find that your knee goes past your ankle, that's quite possible. You may want to bring your feet a little bit wider. Make sure that the knee doesn't go past the ankle, and you want your knee to be in line with the second and third toe as opposed to collapsing inwards. Try to draw that knee open so it stays in line with the second and third toe. Your left hip draws back so your pelvis stays nice and long, and you look towards the middle finger of the right hand as the shoulders draw away from the ears. Hopefully feeling the strength building, the heat building in that front leg. Inhale, press through the right foot, bring the right toes in, exhale fully. Inhale, left toes face the short edge of the mat. Lengthen the crown of the head away from the tailbone. As we exhale, stack the left knee over the left ankle. Again, modify as needed. If you need to bring the feet closer together or further apart, do that. Looking towards the middle finger of the left hand for your stability. Shoulders away from the ears, and you want that left knee to be in line with the second and third toe as opposed to collapsing inwards. Continue to press through the outside of the right foot. Steady your breath even as it's challenging here. And you want your shoulders to be staying stacked over the hips as opposed to leaning forward. Keep them stacked if you can. Inhale, pressing through that front leg to come back to standing. And as we exhale, release, coming back to a mountain pose. Posture number 6 is tree pose, and this is our first really challenging balance posture. We're going to be on one leg. So if you need to come to a wall for stability, and you know that maybe your stability is not as good today, you can come to a wall. We're going to start by standing on our left leg. So you want your left big toe mound, little toe mound, and the heel of the foot nice and grounded. And then we're going to externally rotate at the right leg. So the right hip is doing the movement, the right knee is facing towards the right hand side. Toes grounding into the floor of the right foot, palms together at the heart center. This is the first option. To increase the balancing element a little bit more, bring the sole of the foot towards the calf. Try to make sure that the foot is pressing into the calf and the calf is pressing back into the foot. So both legs are strong, pressing into each other. The final option, if you have quite good mobility in the hips, is to bring the foot towards the inner thigh, palms together at the heart center. Avoid putting the pressure on the knee, so don't press the foot into the knee. We don't need any pressure on the knee joint, so either the calf, inner thigh, or the ankle. Find one position that doesn't move, so don't look at me, because I'll wobble and then you'll wobble. Try to stay focused on one steady position. Looking down will help you stay a little bit more balanced. Looking up will challenge your balance. Try to keep nice and open through the chest, so the shoulders draw away from the ears. The standing leg is really strong without being locked, so you don't want your knee to almost be bending backwards. You want your knee to be slightly bent and the leg to be engaged. Okay, imagine you're drawing the kneecap up. On the inhale, draw the right knee to center if you can. I know it's challenging. And then exhale to release. If you fall out of it, don't worry. Shake out the legs. And we'll come into that on the other side. Grounding now through the foundations on the right foot. Right leg is strong without being locked. So when I say locked, there's a tendency for people with hyperextension. I don't have it, so I can't really show you. But hyperextension is where the knee almost draws back behind you. So if you know that you suffer from hyperextension, just stay really engaged and even bend the knee a little bit more to stay really active through the quadricep. Okay, you don't want to dump the weight into the knee joint. Okay, so strong through the right leg, external rotation at the left hip as the left knee faces towards the left. Press the heel to the ankle, toes on the floor, sole of the foot to the calf, pressing in with equal pressure, or sole of the foot towards the inner thigh, remember not at the knee. Palms together, look forward, shoulders away from the ears, bring the elbows nice and wide. And of course you can come to a wall if maybe you don't feel as stable on this side. It's quite normal to not feel balanced in the body, to feel more open and more balanced on one side. Maybe you're feeling the stretch in the inner thigh here of the left leg. Maybe you're feeling it towards the glute, the butt of the left leg. And you're probably going to be feeling quite a lot of heat building in the standing leg as well. Try to keep a deep connection to that breath. Avoid holding the breath. Deep inhales and exhales through the nose. Your beautiful ocean breathing. And then on the inhale, draw the left knee to center and exhale to release. And shake out the legs, bringing some movement back in. Okay, posture number 7 is downward facing dog, and you'll go to almost any yoga class in the world and downward facing dog will be in it. It is such a fundamental core position that we take in yoga, but I see so many people taking it wrong and they can end up hurting their shoulders or their upper back if they do it wrong. So just take it very slowly, make sure that you take it in little steps and you don't force yourself into the full expression too quickly. So we're actually just going to come into a forward fold to start with. Place the hands on the floor. You can bend your knees as much as you need to here, and then we're just going to step back to a kneeling position to start with. So setting up our foundations first. We really want to be the foundations to be in the hands. We want this to be nice and stable as opposed to just pressing up and hoping for the best. So the foundations of downward facing dog, you want the palms of the hands to be just in front. So the wrist creases are actually in front of the shoulders as opposed to being stacked underneath the shoulders. So that usually means bringing the handprints forward about a hand's distance. You want to be pressing through each knuckle and the palm, the pads of the fingers, that's the word I'm looking for. Pressing through each knuckle and the pads of the fingers, almost like you're gripping the mat. Okay, so you've got that little bit of stability foundations in the hands. You want to be pressing through the knuckles so that you feel almost like a suction cup effect on the palm of the hand. You feel that lift in the middle of the hand. And you want your wrist creases to be facing the short edge of the mat. So that usually means the middle finger faces the front. Sometimes it can be more like the index finger faces the front, depending on your body. So we really want to be pressing through the index finger and the thumb. So that means strong through the insides of the hands and the insides of the forearms. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky. So we're pressing through the insides of the hands, but we want to externally rotate the upper arms. And what that means is we draw the elbow creases to face the short edge of the mat as best we can. So what often happens is when we do this movement, the elbows face forward, the inner hands lift up. So continue to press down through the lower arms as we rotate through the upper arms. I know that sounds a little bit confusing, but it's really important to set up for our foundations. Okay, And then we draw the shoulder blades away from the ears, so down the back and towards the front of the rib cage. So that means we draw the shoulder blades away from the ears, and then we begin to lift through the upper back. Okay, and then from here, only if you feel comfortable in this is already quite strength building in the shoulders. Here we can begin to tuck the toes under. We want the feet to be hips distance apart. Lift those sit bones up and back towards the ceiling. So keep the knees bent to start with. How are you feeling in your hands? Are you still pressing through the insides of the index finger and the thumb? Are the shoulder blades still continuing to draw down the back and then round towards the front of the rib cage? We want the chest to be nice and open. Belly draws in to protect the lower back from overarching, and you want to imagine that your sit bones are reaching up towards the ceiling. So that means, like, imagine that your butt is sticking out the back as best you can. Okay, so this should feel quite strength building. What we don't want to happen is to be bringing the shoulders over the wrists. Okay, actually pressing through the hands to bring the shoulders back. You should feel it like a deep stretch in the backs of the arms and the triceps. And then the full expression of the posture, we begin to press the heels down towards the floor, opening up through the backs of the legs, but make sure that the shoulders and the upper back has priority over the length in the hamstrings, okay? Make sure you can breathe deep as well. If you're here but you're holding your breath, your jaw is clenched and your forehead is furrowed, then just come down onto the knees. Make sure you can breathe deep. It's quite a heat building exercise. Take one more breath in. Exhale, drop to the knees, bring the hands back, just come into a tabletop position, so wrists under shoulders for a minute, and take a couple of breaths. Posture number 8, we're going to come into Cobra Pose. So we're going to take a couple of different variations of this posture. So we're just going to come to lay on our belly, so just bring your knees back, using the strength of the arms, very gently lower down onto your belly. So Cobra Pose, we're going to start off in what's actually called a Sphinx pose. So we're going to bring our elbows underneath our shoulders. We want our forearms to be parallel with each other, fingers spread nice and wide. You want the tops of the feet flat as if you're pressing through all the toes, and the legs slightly engaged, so imagine that your knees are kind of drawing up towards the ceiling. If this feels like stress in the lower back, so about here, if you're feeling stress here, just bring the elbows forward a little bit, bringing the stretch into more of the upper back, okay? The neck is in a neutral position, so I see a lot of the time people looking up towards the ceiling, really craning through the back of their neck. Remember that the neck is just an extension of the spine, so following the natural curve, that usually means looking up slightly, so maybe towards the top of the wall as opposed to up towards the ceiling. Okay, taking one more inhale, and then exhale, release. Bring the hands underneath the shoulders. Okay, we're going to come into a Cobra Pose, moving into mid Cobra, and then maybe moving into high Cobra, depending on how you're feeling. So to start with, we want the palms underneath the shoulders, fingers spread wide. Now the crucial part of Cobra, which can be tricky for beginners, is to keep the elbows drawn into the ribs. So as if you're doing, when you're doing a traditional press up type thing, the elbows draw out towards the side and the hands are really wide. We want the palms underneath the shoulders, elbows in towards the ribs, so staying nice and open through the chest. Tops of the feet flat. Legs are engaged here. Keep the feet at hips distance apart. On the inhale, we lift the chest, look forward. Now we don't want to be using the strength of the arms here. You could almost lift the hands up. You're using the strength of the spine itself to lift the chest. Now that may not look like much at all. You may be down here, and that's fine. Work with it until you're feeling the strength building in the spine. Elbows back. Legs engaged. Avoid over squeezing the glutes if you can. There's a tendency to kind of really activate through the glutes here. Avoid over squeezing. You can use them a little bit to help you get up, but try to avoid making them really tight if you can. Exhale, release down. So you can come into another one of those, or if you wanted to try a slightly deeper back bend, bring the hands back about hands distance so they're in line with the chest. Keep the elbows drawn in, and this time you can use the strength of the hands a little bit. So as we inhale, coming up. So maybe now the rib cage begins to lift off the floor, pressing strong through the tops of the feet, looking forward or looking up. Exhale, release down.
And you can come into another one of those, or for the full cobra, very advanced back bend here, so take it slowly. You can bring the hands back towards the rib cage, keep the elbows drawn in, and this time as we inhale, maybe we can come all the way up to straight arms. So keep the knees, keep the elbows bent slightly, so to avoid hyperextension, keep them bent slightly, lifting the chest, lifting the gaze. Again, you don't want to be feeling strain in the lower back here. Make sure you modify, so coming into a slightly less intense variation if you're feeling that strain. And maybe this time even the tops of the hips begin to lift up off the floor. Okay, so beginning to stretch even the tops of the legs. Don't take this if you're feeling compression in the lower back or pains in the shoulders or the wrists. This is quite stressful on the wrists as well, so be gentle here. And exhale, bending in the elbows with control. Very gently roll back down. And then this brings us to posture number 9, which is our counter pose, which is child's pose. So bringing the hands underneath the shoulders again, lift those hips up and back. So I'm just going to grab a block here. You may also want a blanket. So if you're in a kneeling position to start with, say you're here and you can't get your heels and your hips to touch, so you're finding this really stretches through the fronts of the quadriceps, then I recommend that you grab a blanket or a cushion and place it between the thighs and the shins so that you can sit the hips down comfortably. Okay, and then from here we're going to move into a fold. So you can either have your knees together, or for an inner stretch, stretch in the inner thighs, you can bring your knees towards mat distance apart. And then we're going to fold forward. So bringing your hands out in front, release your forehead towards the block on any setting, depending on the mobility here. Maybe you don't need the block and you can release your forehead down towards the earth. So sometimes I see people with their hips high here because they don't quite reach the heels. That's fine, but slowly in time, work with pressing through the hands so that the hips can come lower down. As I said, if you have a block or a cushion, or sorry, a blanket or a cushion between the thighs and the calves, that's going to be really useful to help you here. But you ultimately want your hips to be sinking low, stretching through the fronts of the legs. This is ultimately to release from our back bend, so lengthen through the spine, staying nice and open through the chest. This is child's pose, probably one of my favorite postures. If you ever feel like your practice is getting too intense or you're struggling to maintain your breath, just come into a posture like this. This is a really restorative, wonderful way of reconnecting to your breathing, calming your mind's eye. And then as we inhale, just walk the hands back up. Bring the knees together. Sit the hips off to one side and then extend your legs out in front. Knees can be bent to start with. And this brings us to posture number 10, which is seated forward fold. So usually in class we're going to have some kind of forward fold. They can be standing like we did earlier, or they could be seated like we're going to go through now. So I recommend here that you just start with your knees bent. Okay, you can take a hold of the backs of the thighs so that the chest can stay nice and lifted. If you're here and you still find that you're rounding through the back, you can't get the back to straighten because the backs of the legs are too tight, then just sit up on a block. Okay, you want to be feeling nice and tall through the spine. As you can see, this helps to stay nice and lifted through the chest. You can keep the finger pads on the outsides of the hips as we lengthen the spine, keeping the knees bent. We're looking to feel the stretch here in the backs of the legs. You're not feeling it in the lower back. Okay, if you're working with this, you can slowly begin to extend the legs towards straight, sitting up on the block, feeling that. And maybe you don't need the block. Maybe you're working with this, the legs are straight. Palms of the hands to the outsides of the hips. Keep the toes flexed if you can, so avoid sort of letting the legs just roll out to the side. Keep the knees facing up and the toes flexed back towards you. Okay, so just taking a little bit of a test here. Notice if you can stay in this position without the benefit of the hands here. So if you're sitting on a block, again, you can stay here. See if you can notice the length in the spine stays the same, even without the hands on the floor. So if you remove the hands and this happens, then I recommend you just stay here planting through the hands. You can always have a block under the knees for support. If you can, take the hands away from the floor and stay nice and tall through the spine. We're just going to play a little bit with the tilt of the pelvis. So when we move into a forward fold, what we really want to be happening is what's called an anterior tilt in the pelvis. And it's best if you visualize that as the hip bones coming forward and the sit bones coming back. So your legs are here. You want your pelvis to be doing this as opposed to doing this. So you want your pelvis to be initiating the movement of the fold as opposed to the low back. That's why often when you see people reaching for their feet, what happens is their back rounds, and what happens is they arch, and then the shoulders end up taking the brunt of it. The low back ends up getting compression. So just to try and isolate this movement, just imagine here, you're sitting nice and upright, and then you're going to bring your hip bones forward and your sit bones back. Okay, just trying to isolate the movement from here. You'll feel the hip flexors beginning to engage as well. You may even see it. So as you bring the hip bones forward, the tops of the legs become more active as they draw the fronts of the hips down and they draw the sit bones back. Okay, and you can feel it maybe even beginning to lengthen the backs of the legs. If you're struggling with this movement, then just stay here. If you can confidently find this movement that you need in the pelvis, then maybe you can begin to bring your hands to the backs of the thighs or the shins, or even take the strap around the feet. Stay nice and tall through the spine. So if you're taking the strap or even taking the hold of the feet themselves, depending on your mobility, just make sure that you're using the strength of the arms to draw the elbows down towards the floor. Keep the chest lifted between the shoulders as opposed to rounding. Again, be very vigilant here. Having this kind of stretch where you're rounding through the back and through the shoulders is going to have really no benefit on the backs of the legs at all. So sitting upright, being up here is going to be far more beneficial to you than being down here, rounding through the upper back. Okay, so chest through, lengthening the crown of the head away from the tailbone. You really want to be feeling the stretch in the backs of the legs. Try to consciously activate the fronts of the legs. Take one more deep full breath. And then inhale, coming all the way back up. So this in itself is called staff pose, pressing the palms of the hands to the outside of the hips and lengthening. Okay. Posture number 11, and this is our last posture before we come into our resting position. So I like to finish off with a twist. So just to make sure we get that nice juicy stretch and we twist everything out. So this one is called Half Lord of the Fishes pose, and it's a lovely twist to start with. It's not too deep. If you do have any lower back issues or any SI joint pain, try to be really gentle here with a twist. Make sure you're not forcing the low back or the pelvis into an uncomfortable position, and just move into a place where you're feeling a nice twist in the upper back, but not the lower back. Okay, so to start with, we're going to bend the right knee, and then you're going to place the right foot to the outside of the left knee. You're going to use your left hand to draw the right thigh in towards the chest, so in towards the midline. You're drawing that knee in with your right hand to the outside of the right hip, lengthening through the spine. Okay, so we really want to stay tall through the crown of the head. You want your pelvis to be nice and level, your low belly to draw in, and then imagine that you're trying to get your rib cage to touch the top of the right thigh. Okay, you want your crook of your elbow to be around the knee, nice and supported, maybe even beginning to look out over the right shoulder. And you want your left leg to stay nice and active. So you want the toes flexed on the left leg. Imagine again that you're drawing that kneecap up. And you want your shoulders to be stacked over the hips. So avoid leaning back. Instead, imagine your belly is drawing towards your thigh, chest nice and open. Trying to connect the shoulder blades together behind you as we lengthen through the collarbone, the front of the chest. And then look to center. And very gently draw the knee into the midline and release. We'll come into that on the other side. So draw the left knee in. Left foot to the outside of the right knee, using the crook of the right arm, the right elbow, draw the left knee in towards the midline as the left hand comes to the outside of the left hip. Okay, right leg stays nice and active as we twist. Imagine that your right rib well, the right side of your rib cage is drawing towards the left thigh. Try to avoid twisting through the lower back. Make sure that both sit bones are grounded so you're nice and strong through your foundations. Chest is lifted, shoulder blades are drawing back together behind you as the shoulders draw back and away from the ears. Looking out over the left shoulder only if it feels good on the neck. And you never want to force a twist. You want to let it naturally develop. Okay, because you're not going to get any benefit from over twisting. You're just going to get a nice stretch in the rib cage if you get a good amount of twist, but you don't want to be doing any damage to the spine. Inhale, we look to center. Very gently unwind, draw the knee into the center line and release. Posture number 12, which is my favorite posture, Shavasana it's called, which is in English translates to corpse pose, which is probably not the nicest name for a posture, but it's our final relaxation. So we're actually going to come down to lay on our backs. If this is uncomfortable for you, you know that laying on your back, especially on a hard surface, can be uncomfortable, then you feel free to go into your bed or grab any cushions to place underneath the backs of the knees or the back of the head or underneath the lower back if you've had issues with your lower back. Otherwise, we're just going to come straight down onto our backs. We're going to bring our feet a little bit wider, so more like mat distance apart, so as if you're bringing your feet to the long edges of the mat out towards the front corners. And then release your arms alongside the body at about 45 degrees. So the palms are facing up, fingertips are beginning to curl into the palms of the hands. You can even give your fingers a little squeeze here just to make sure you're not holding any tension in the wrists. Allow your feet to roll open to the sides, maybe bring a bit of movement into the ankles as well. And then just use this opportunity to feel comfortable in the body. So for me personally, I like to draw my shoulder blades together to create a little shelf for my heart to rest on. I like to tip my tailbone towards the backs of the legs. So imagine that you're flattening the lower back again, so you've got no compression in the lower back. And I even tip my chin towards my chest slightly to create the length along the back of the neck. I just find that feels really comfortable, but just modify to a position where you feel completely relaxed. Your body can release, you can consciously let go of any tension you may be feeling in the body. Feeling heavy, feeling grounded, and feeling still. Then you can release your ocean breathing or your yoga breathing and allow your soft, natural, rhythmic breath to return to you. Long, deep inhales and exhales through the nose. Feeling the breath traveling all the way down into the belly. And allowing the mind to quiet. Any stories or thoughts or emotions that crop up, pass you by, let them go. Let them pass you by without attaching yourself to them. And if you do feel your mind beginning to shift, just softly bring it back to your breath, watching again your inhales and your exhales. And just rest here in complete stillness and balance of the body, the breath, and the mind for another couple of minutes.
very gently begin to bring your minds back to your breathing. Begin to watch your inhales and your exhales traveling in through the nose, through the throat, lifting the chest, lifting and separating the rib cage, and then expanding a full deep belly breath. And as you exhale, you release from your belly, your ribs, your chest, your throat, and back out through the nose. And then begin to bring some soft movements back into the body, starting in the tips of the fingers and the toes. And then working your way through to your wrists, your ankles, your elbows, your knees, your shoulders, and your hips. Take any stretch that feels good to you. This is your dessert stretch. So listen to your body, listen to what you're craving. And then once you've had your stretch, draw your knees into your chest, give your legs a little squeeze, hug them tight. And then softly roll onto your right hand side, giving yourself a moment or two to be grateful for yourself to showing up to your practice today. And softly blinking the eyes open, allowing the light to return to you. And then pressing through your left hand, gently prop yourself back up to a seat, bringing the palms together at the heart center. Thank you so much for practicing with me today. As you go forward, I wish you peace in your thoughts, peace in your words, and peace in your heart. Namaste.